In these moments of really high stakes international crisis, words, they're not just words, they're weapons. Every single statement gets picked apart. Every demand is weighed. But what's fascinating is that sometimes the most powerful statements aren't the ones that close all the doors. They're the ones that secretly build a back door. Today, we're going to break down a true masterclass in strategic communication, a situation where what looked like an absolute unshakable demand was actually hiding a brilliant escape plan.
I mean, listen to that. It's a stark, totally uncompromising statement, right? Made right at the peak of this huge geopolitical standoff. On the surface, it sounds like a pure ultimatum. No wiggle room, no negotiation. It's a line in the sand. It seems to lock one of the world's most powerful nations into a corner. Either you get total victory or you face total failure. But, and this is the key, as we're about to see, the real meaning of those words was so much more complex, and frankly, a lot more cunning than almost anyone realized. All right, so here's how we're going to break this all down. First, we'll look at that unyielding demand and the military muscle flexing that went with it. Then we'll get into the tough reality of what happens when the conflict actually starts. That's going to lead us to the absolute core of this whole thing, how the very definition of surrender got changed. From there, we'll dig into the strategy of using that ambiguity. And finally, we'll zoom out and look at the bigger picture here, what this tells us about the art of the exit. So, let's set the scene. Things were already at a boiling point. The rhetoric was incredibly heated, threats were being thrown back and forth, and you can bet the entire world was watching. In an atmosphere like that, a public declaration of unconditional surrender, well, that's not just a statement. It's a calculated, strategic move. It's all about projecting absolute, unwavering strength and resolve. It's designed to leave zero doubt in anyone's mind about what you intend to do. But of course, words alone are never enough, are they? To really back up that hardline stance, you have to put your pieces on the board. Military assets started moving. And deploying a second aircraft carrier battle group, that is a massive projection of power. We're talking about a floating city, really. It's a symbol of overwhelming force, and it sends a signal that you're ready for a long, large-scale fight, if it comes to that. The pressure just skyrockets. Suddenly, the threat of force isn't just talk, it's undeniable. The message couldn't be clearer. This demand for surrender, it's not a bluff. But here's the thing about pressure. It often creates resistance. Iran didn't just fold. Not at all. Instead, they responded with their own show of defiance. They started publicly challenging the American naval presence right there in the Strait of Hormuz. And you have to remember, this is one of the most vital strategic choke points in the world for oil. So this wasn't some quiet submission. This was a direct counter-challenge. It was a clear signal saying, we will not be intimidated. And just like that, the standoff was locked. Neither side was backing down. Okay, so political declarations and moving ships around, that's one thing. But the actual reality of an armed conflict, that is something else entirely. As this standoff dragged on, that abstract chessboard of geopolitics, it started to get marked by real, tangible, irreversible consequences. The cost was no longer theoretical. It became painfully real. And it wasn't measured in dollars or diplomatic points anymore. It was measured in human lives. And then it happened. The cost of this standoff stopped being a concept. It became tragically real. 6. Just 6. 6 American soldiers were killed in Iranian counterattacks. Now, in the grand, cold calculus of a potential war, you might hear the number 6 and think it's small. But back home, for the American public, for the families, for the nation, that number is a seismic event. It changes the entire dynamic of the conflict overnight. And you really have to understand this to get the whole picture. In American politics, the loss of even one service member becomes a huge national story. It triggers intense public debate, and it puts immense pressure on the administration. Every single casualty just fuels more questions. Why are we there? What's the strategy? Is the leadership making the right calls? It just gets harder and harder to justify a long, drawn-out conflict. So now, with the human cost right there for everyone to see, that absolute demand for unconditional surrender, well, it starts to look politically impossible to maintain back home. The longer this goes on, the more the pressure builds, not on Iran, but on the White House itself. And right here, this is where the whole story pivots. You've got this long, drawn-out war with mounting casualties on one hand, and this ironclad, unyielding demand on the other. They just don't seem to fit together, do they? So you have to ask, was the whole strategy just flawed from the very beginning? Or was there something else going on? Another layer we weren't seeing? What if the definition of unconditional surrender was never what we all thought it was? And this brings us to the absolute heart of the strategy. See, this wasn't really about military might or political pressure in the way we usually think about it. No, this was about controlling the narrative. And how do you do that? You control the dictionary. This was a masterclass in semantics, brilliantly designed to create a win out of any possible outcome, simply by redefining what the word victory even meant. Okay, so just look at this deliberate shift in meaning. On the one hand, you have the traditional definition of unconditional surrender. It's totally unambiguous, right? It means a formal public declaration of defeat. It means giving up sovereignty. It's an objective thing that happens. But then, on the other hand, you have the White House's interpretation, which was, well, very different, and crucially, a whole lot more flexible. In this new definition, unconditional surrender just meant whenever the president decided that Iran was no longer a threat and that his campaign objectives had been met. You see the difference? The new definition is entirely subjective. It has nothing to do with what Iran does and everything to do with what the president says. And if you want proof, look no further than the quote from the man himself. It just reveals the intentional ambiguity perfectly. Just listen to the language he's using. It could be, but it could also be. That's not a fixed definition. That is a whole spectrum of possibilities. It keeps the door open for a traditional formal surrender, sure, but it also creates this much wider, much lower bar for what he can call a victory. This isn't someone being confused. This is strategic flexibility, and it was baked into the demand from day one. So let's just land on this for a second, because it's the whole key. That ambiguity, it wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a flaw in the plan. It was the plan. By defining victory on his own terms, right from the very beginning, the leader had basically engineered a situation where it was politically impossible for him to lose, no matter what actually happened on the battlefield.
And this just shows you the two different pathways to a win that he created for himself. It's brilliant, really. So, path number one, the conflict goes great. Iran is defeated militarily, or they just give up. Okay, that's a clear, conventional victory. It's exactly what the public expects when they hear unconditional surrender. But path number two, this is where the genius of the strategy really shines. Let's say the conflict gets too expensive or too unpopular politically. The U.S. can just withdraw. And the leader can then stand up and declare that because of the military action they took, Iran is no longer a threat. And boom, he's met his own subjective definition of victory. It's a perfect heads I win, tails you lose scenario, created completely through language.
You know, this is actually a classic business tactic. It's all about planning your exit before you even go in. It's about knowing when to cut your losses. By building that exit ramp right into your very first statement, you give yourself the power to end the whole thing whenever you decide to, not when your opponent forces you to. It means you can walk away from a really tough situation and frame it not as a retreat, but as mission accomplished. You get to maintain that image of strength and control even as you're heading for the door.
So let's zoom out now, because this brings us to a much bigger idea. We can see how this one specific tactic is really part of a much broader, more universal strategic principle. I mean, this isn't just about geopolitics. It's not just about one specific leader. This whole concept of engineering your exit from the very start, it applies to almost every single significant commitment we make in our lives. I mean, just think about it. In geopolitics, it's about how to withdraw your troops while still saving face. In investing, a truly great investor isn't just good at picking what to buy. They are masters at knowing exactly when to sell a losing asset to protect their capital. In the business world, it's knowing how to discontinue a failing product without trashing your brand's reputation. And heck, even in our personal relationships, knowing how to end a partnership gracefully can be the difference that prevents mutual destruction. The principle is exactly the same no matter where you look.
And really, that's the ultimate takeaway here, isn't it? Starting something, whether it's a military campaign, a new investment, a business project, or even a relationship, that's often the easy part. You're running on optimism and ambition. But the exit, that's where the true skill, the real strategy, is revealed. Because planning how you're going to end something, especially when things aren't going your way, that takes real foresight. It takes discipline. And it takes a deep, deep understanding of how to control the story right up until the very end.
So as we wrap this up, it really leaves us with a pretty powerful question to think about. In our own lives, both professional and personal, when we jump into these new ventures and new commitments, how much time do we actually spend thinking about the end game? Have we taken the time to define what victory looks like on our own terms? And maybe most importantly, have we, like a true master strategist, already planned our exit before we've even taken that first step?